this guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Deputy Commissioner McDonald, have you or anyone else at the RCMP been asked by anyone in the BC NDP government or federal Liberal government from the beginning of 2023 to today, including elected officials, staff of elected officials, department staff, or anyone, to not speak publicly about safe supply related drug seizures?
Thank you for the question. No.
Deputy Commissioner McDonald, in April, a memo was leaked from your division, E Division, to all frontline personnel as well as all detachments in British Columbia, essentially saying that it is an election year and that there are so-called hot button topics such as safe supply, and it is they have asked for, you have asked, or your office has asked for frontline officers as well as detachments to not comment publicly on these hot button political issues.
I'm sorry, would you want me to respond? Is there a question there?
Is that, where did that come from, and what concern was there that caused that gag order to be issued?
Well, I think it's important. First off, yes, that memo was directed by our communications director here in the province. The police have a very important role to play in many instances of public safety issues, particularly in the illicit drug challenge that we face in British Columbia. And it's very important that police are objective in this. So any comments that may be perceived to either support or not support any one particular party can have a negative impact on the objective role of the police. Our job is to get out the facts.
I appreciate that, sir. But whether it's an election year or not, do you believe that British Columbians and indeed Canadians deserve to know the truth about criminal activity in their communities?
They absolutely do, and we share that information regularly, as you've seen from many news releases recently about seizures of illicit drugs and some cases safe supply drugs.
With all due respect, the memo came out after both Prince George released a statement regarding safe supply and ongoing investigations, as well as Campbell River. We know that Victoria, Nanaimo, Kamloops, Kelowna are all seeing the same. Doesn't it seem that there would appear, at least publicly, that there's a concern from E Division and those above that again, that communities in our province deserve to know the truth about what's going on in our region?
I completely agree that the communities deserve to know the truth, and it's our responsibility to provide the facts and the evidence to the communities when we see that occur.
Sir, the definition of widespread is distributed over a wide region or occurring in many places or among many persons or individuals. Assistant Commissioner John Brewer has said, he's on the record as saying there's currently no evidence to support a widespread diversion of safer supply drugs in the illicit market in BC and or Canada. We know from testimony as well as from reports of these investigations and these arrests that is taking place in Prince George, Campbell River, Victoria, Nanaimo, Kamloops, Kelowna, and indeed First Nations across our area and in Alberta. Would that not, just by the very nature of all those communities, would that not, common sense would say that that is a widespread problem?
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to provide the context for that statement from Assistant Commissioner Brewer. It was in response at that time to statements made that we had safer supply diverted to most communities in British Columbia and outside the province. At present, we do not have evidence to suggest that safer supply has been diverted outside of British Columbia. We do see, and I agree with you, that we've seen it in some of the communities that you've listed. Those are also the same communities that have a predominant criminal illicit drug market and organized crime groups in them. And as we identify them, we're addressing them, but we have not seen it everywhere. However, I will say it is an emerging concern, and it's something we're following very closely.
Would your frontline officers, the 6,800 frontline officers in British Columbia, would they agree with that statement that there is no evidence to support widespread diversion? They're seeing it every day on the ground.
Again, thank you for the question. I would say it depends on the community in which they serve, because we're not seeing it in every community. We are seeing it in some communities.
A few months ago, I was downtown in a bar here in Ottawa. Not that I do that very often, but a couple of my colleagues that I met up with, one was assaulted as he was going to the bar. Another one was threatened. About within a month of that also, I was returning down Wellington Street from downtown to Rideau Centre. My son, who's 15, was coming after me. It was nighttime, and there was someone out in the middle of the streets yelling and screaming, kind of accosting cars. I asked them, the parliamentary police said this to them, and they said, "Oh, he's someone we know. Don't worry about him." My son didn't know that, so I waited for him because I didn't want him to have to face some kind of crazy person accosting him in the street. There's certainly the perception by a lot of Canadians that a lot of downtown cores are basically out of control. And certainly there's also the perception that around places like safe supply, safe injection sites, that things are worse, that there are people openly stoned in the street. People are getting CPR performed on them in the street. There's needles around in the street. There's excrement in the street. Now, one of the pillars of the Swiss approach to their drug problem is trying to decrease harm to society. I would note that that is not part of the Canadian approach. Does that need to be more part of the approach? And I'm asking this to the representatives of the police out there. Do you agree that this is a problem? Do you agree, for a lot of Canadians who aren't involved with drugs, that they are increasingly unhappy with society and downtown cores which are this way? Do you want to do more about this? And if you do want to do more about this, what do you need in order to better address this situation? So let me start with, let me start with the RCMP, and then we'll go on from there.
Thank you for your question. I would note that in our experience, one of the success factors that is required for decriminalization is public support. And I think when you're faced with situations where, as we've seen and experienced in our communities, we hear from our communities, where public consumption in some places may lead to other members of the public feeling at risk or threatened or vulnerable to street-level crime, as you've spoken about, it does present a challenge because it not only creates situations where criminal activity can occur, but it also puts a stigma on people who use drugs that may or may not be engaged in that type of activity. And if we don't have public support moving forward, decriminalization and societal acceptance of that will be an uphill battle.
Do you believe that this diversion in terms of conversation around the diversion of safer supply substances is actually causing more harm by slowing down the pace of addressing the real root causes and the real problems and us responding to this drug crisis? Ms. Wilson, I'll let you start.
Well, I certainly think that for us here in Vancouver, as I said earlier, we focus on what is doing the most harm. And we know that diverted safe supply, diverted prescription medications are not what's killing people. And also, when you consider the volume or the potential volume to scale up diverted prescriptions, diverted safe supply, it pales in comparison to what organized crime are doing in terms of fentanyl production, importation, exportation. Those are really where we focus our efforts here in Vancouver. And I think it's important that we continue to use our finite resources to focus in on those areas that are, and those individuals, those groups that are doing the most harm. So although I think diversion is important, we need to keep an eye on it. It has been around for a very, very long time. And in my mind, when we look at the overdose deaths and when we look at the scalability, there are other areas that I would focus in on in terms of the individuals and groups who are doing the most harm.
Deputy Commissioner McDonald, have organized crimes incorporated safe supply pharmaceuticals into their trafficking operations? Yes or no?
Yes.
Corporal Jennifer Cooper of the Prince George RCMP said the following: "We have noted an alarming trend over the last year in the amount of prescription drugs located during drug trafficking investigations, as well as organized crime groups are actively involved in the redistribution of safe supply. Do you agree with those statements?
Yes, our organized crime groups are trafficking not only illicit substances, but any prescription drugs that they can get their hands on.
We know of an recent investigation in Prince George, where organized crime individuals literally stood outside of pharmacies and bought or collected the safe supply from those that were receiving it. Is this true?
Yes.
Is decriminalization, from what you're hearing from frontline officers, in your opinion, has decriminalization contributed to an increase in general street disorder and illicit drug use in the public?
From our experience in our communities, I'm not certain you can draw the correlation that decriminalization has contributed to an increased disorder. What we do see, as we've noted, both myself and the other police officials on this panel have noticed, is that the public consumption of illicit substances is presenting increasing challenges for law enforcement to deal with, and it's becoming an increasing concern in our communities.
Understand that the nature of your comments and those of others in downplaying the seriousness of the diversion problem or denying that there's a problem at all goes against every detachment and municipality fighting for more resources for policing. Assistant Commissioner Ng just said we need the tools. So when we're fighting for those municipalities, when municipalities are asking for more resources, when you have statements such as Assistant Commissioner Brewer's or indeed yours, it kind of flies in the face of those of us that are trying and fighting for you to get the tools and the resources to do your job. Do you understand that?
Well, I would disagree in the sense that we're not downplaying diversion. We are identifying where it's occurring, how it's occurring, and the fact that it's occurring in addition to the other illicit substances and drugs that our organized crime groups are trafficking in. We're targeting those groups, and we have a commitment to provide accurate and timely information to the public and to government officials so that they too are aware of the problem.
On March 11th, the statement on safer supply, the seizure of prescription drugs such as narcotics and opioids that are no longer in the possession of the prescribed owner is something the police have had to deal with on many occasions. Again, it goes back to there's currently no evidence to support a widespread diversion of safer supply drugs in the illicit market in BC or Canada. Deputy Commissioner McDonald, I'm going to have to disagree with you when your frontline officers and your detachments are actually producing and presenting more evidence to that. It's frustrating when you have folks that are fighting for you and fighting for your frontline officers, and I know that they disagree with the public statements. And then you have comments such as this. It would appear that the RCMP and indeed the BC Chiefs of Police are covering for the government in an election year on an issue that's politically bad for them. Can you at least agree with me that that would, that's exactly how your comments and those of some of your officers would be taken?
No, I'm sorry. I completely disagree with that.
Well, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that. How many more communities need to report diversion of so-called safe supply before it crosses the threshold of widespread? All right. Ms. Wilson, are all of the BC Chiefs of Police on side with decrim and safe supply? Or is there some that are concerned and want to push pause on this experiment?
Well, I can certainly say we've expressed our significant concerns with decriminalization. There's no question about that. I think one thing all chiefs across the province agree on is that we do not want to throw people in jail simply by virtue of their personal drug use. Beyond that, as we've learned, the devil is in the details. We have been flagging the issue of public consumption since prior to the submission of the exemption request. And what's happened is exactly what we predicted would happen. We're satisfied that the province has tried to address that through the Public Consumption Act, unfortunately unsuccessfully to this point. And back to the matter of diversion, the reality is that, there are 7 people a day dying in British Columbia as a result of the toxic drug crisis, and they are not dying as a result of prescription diverted medication. They are dying because of the poisonous drug supply that is on our streets.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson.
My colleague, Dr. Pawlowski, described what it's like to walk around downtown Ottawa here, and certainly when I walk home every day, I encounter similar circumstances. But this is not an area where we have a decriminalized approach. So can you just talk about the correlation? I know there is a correlation with public acceptance, and that this is a serious issue to be addressed. But can you talk about the correlation between decriminalization and public safety and public consumption?
Absolutely. So prior to decriminalization, if someone was using drugs in a problematic circumstance, for example, at a playground or at a bus shelter or at a beach, police were able to, community members were able to call 911, police were able to attend, and were able to address that circumstance. The vast majority of drug users, and I've done 3 tours of duty in the downtown east side, I can assure you, have no interest in using drugs around youth and children, for example. However, when those circumstances do arise, it's very, very important that police have the tools to address it. And in the wake of decriminalization, there are many of those locations where we have absolutely no authority to address that problematic drug use because the person appears to be in possession of less than 2.5 grams, and they are not in a place that is an exception to the exemption. We had 3 exceptions added to the exemption last year in September, which was helpful. So that included skate parks, playgrounds, and there was a few other exceptions that were added. So we now have 9 exceptions to the exemption. But the reality is there are still a number of other circumstances where the public have significant concerns about problematic drug use. And when that happens, if it's not in a place that's an exception to the exemption, there's nothing police can do. It is not a police matter in the absence of any other criminal behavior. So if you have somebody who's with their family at the beach and there's a person next to them smoking crack cocaine, it's not a police matter because a beach currently is not an exception to the exemption. That's what we were hoping to have addressed through the Public Consumption Act. The thing I really liked about the Act was it did not further criminalize people by virtue of their drug use. Rather, it required police to ask people to leave, and it was the refusal to leave that would have introduced criminal sanctions, as in obstruct. So, I thought it was a really good balance between what we had previously under the CDSA and also, respecting the rights of people who use drugs, but also ensuring that people in our community feel safe. And I think that's a very, very important issue.
Is decriminalization in itself a faulty principle?
I think we all agree that we do not want to criminalize people when they've got, by virtue of their personal drug use. Those days are gone. We want to support a health-led approach. The problem is, as I said earlier, the devil's in the details. And those details were not, and quite frankly, police warnings were not heeded in the first instance. And so we've got situations, for example, where technically people could use under 2.5 grams of a variety of illicit substances in a licensed establishment as long as the licensee allowed them to, and they weren't contravening any smoking bylaws, for example. That opens up a whole can of worms for police, potentially. If you have a nefarious business owner who's has a licensed establishment, technically you could have a situation where there's an 18-year-old who could use cocaine in a licensed establishment but can't order a beer, assuming that the licensee allowed them to do that. So these are all things that we raised prior to decriminalization taking effect that we don't feel were adequately addressed. However, we strongly support the notion of not trying to arrest ourselves out of this crisis.
What other exceptions to the exemption would you like to see?
Personally, based on this journey that I've been on from the very beginning, in fact, initially with the City of Vancouver and then with the province, I would like to see additional exceptions in places like beaches, bus shelters within a certain distance of residential buildings, businesses, the entrance of a workplace, for example, sports fields, parks, places where families and youth could reasonably be expected to be.
Do you think that we should have an exemption for drug use in hospitals?
Absolutely. Like one of the things that we talked about was private and semi-private places. Like, for example, in Tim Hortons or in a McDonald's, hospitals are another great example. When we consulted with our health authority here in Vancouver, they have been dealing with the matter of people having drugs in their possession for many, many, many years, whether it be going into an ambulance or into a hospital. However, the fact is that, once again, when those conditions in a hospital become problematic, there's nothing the police can do about it.
And it's really unfortunate that you guys don't have the tools to be able to do what you need to do to keep our communities safe and people away from having new addictions. My question is kind of simple. Why didn't the Vancouver police arrest the Drug Users Liberation Front when they handed out about $3,000 worth of drugs in front of the Vancouver Police Department in 2021?
So there's all sorts of considerations that go into a decision such as that, including Crown's likelihood of approving charges. And, not to say that we don't collect evidence with respect to that incident and others similar, but we do have a number of things that we have to consider, including Crown's directive with respect to their drug policy. So there's a number of considerations, some of which remain quite confidential, and I only mean that from a policing perspective. We employ all sorts of techniques, including covert ones that we simply wouldn't talk about in public setting.
So my question is to Deputy Commissioner McDonald. Has the inability to seize less than 2.5 grams of fentanyl or any substance under BC's decriminalization had a negative impact on your ability to get deadly fentanyl off the streets?
Thank you for your question. The permitted exemption for personal possession presents some challenges for law enforcement when we're conducting investigations in terms of, starting at the grassroots level and leading up to those that are trafficking. We have modified our investigative techniques. We've conducted a significant amount of training. So it took a while for law enforcement to adapt our approach and principles, but we haven't seen a decrease in trafficking investigations or trafficking charges in British Columbia as a result.
Well, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for everyone for being here today. Dr. Day, we talked a bit about the amounts of drugs that have been decriminalized. And we throw around this amount of 2.5 grams of fentanyl. I've spoken about it in the committee here. I'm a former physician, but you're a current addiction specialist. Maybe it means more coming from you to put that in perspective as to how deadly that amount of fentanyl actually is.
Thanks for that question. I think I'll put it this way, Dr. Ellis. There are published case reports in the literature of people dying of overdose from accidental administration of 3 milligrams of hydromorphone in a hospital setting. There are multiple cases of that, and that's why it's a high-risk medication, and why we go to so much effort to label things morphine versus hydromorphone. Hydromorphone is extremely potent and could kill a person with no trouble if they don't have opioid tolerance. When we look at fentanyl, which is 50 times more potent than morphine, and then you look at the number of grams that a person could hold, that certainly is an amount that could easily kill one or more people.
Well, thanks very much for that, Dr. Day. And to me, it would seem slightly ridiculous to allow people to have 2.5 grams of fentanyl when routinely, perhaps in the emergency room, if we were going to use it for a procedure to reduce a dislocated shoulder, we might use 200 micrograms. Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you very much for that. The criminal operations officer, Mr. Ng, you talked a bit about precursor chemicals and the difficulty having them listed as being illegal in Canada. Is that something that law enforcement regularly communicates to the Liberal government to say we need better action and quicker action on that?
Yes, thank you for your question. And through the chair, we have communicated through the Law and Amendments Committee and a number of other committees to government that we'd like to advocate for the scheduling of those precursors. And so far, I think it's still a work in progress.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, again to you, sir. Do you have any idea how long that's been in the process now?
It's been brought to my attention for over 2 years.
So what you're telling this committee is that we know that there are precursor chemicals out there used to make fentanyl, carfentanil, sufentanil, etc., incredibly potent opioids that are killing people on the street, part of this so-called toxic drug supply, that this government could actually make illegal, and for 2 years they've refused to do so.
Through the chair, I can't comment on the refusal part, but I can comment on the time it's taken to continue to advocate for it.
So it's not happened in 2 years, basically.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Deputy Chief Wilson, we talked a bit about the drugs that are on the street these days, and clearly 8 milligram tablets of hydromorphone are incredibly potent. There's a plethora of them out there on the street, perhaps one of the drugs of choice nowadays. We know that, again, 8 milligrams is significant because that is what is being issued in safe supply regimes, approximately 30 tablets at a time, I understand. Can you comment a bit of what you've seen about the price of hydromorphone on the street?
I'm sorry, I'm not up to speed with respect to the price of hydromorphone. I know that it's very, very cheap, but I also know it's not hydromorphone that is killing people in our province.
That's a fair statement. That being said, you talked a bit about your tour of duty in the downtown east side previously, which I thought was an unusual comment, given you were serving in a metro Canadian city. Why did you characterize it as a tour of duty?
In the Vancouver Police Department, we commonly talk about different areas that we work as a tour of duty. So I've done 3 in the downtown east side. I did a tour of duty in professional standards. It's just a common police phrase.
No, certainly I have a military background, so I would not comment if serving in a downtown metro of Vancouver a tour of duty, but I understand you have a different way of referring to things, so thank you for that. Deputy Commissioner McDonald, do you have any idea about the street prices of hydromorphone in BC in general?
Thank you for the question. We do have specifics that we could provide at a later date. I do understand, and what I'm told, is the price of hydromorphone in the illicit market has gone down significantly in the last while.
Thank you.
If you could table those with the committee, we'd be very appreciative if you could look at the prices over time. That would be excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. To you, Deputy Chief Wilson, if I might, you talk about multiple exceptions to the exemption in the decriminalization experiment. It would appear to me that there wouldn't be many other public places for people to use drugs if that your wish were to come true, which would allow people to take back the downtowns that they so would like to visit, like Dr. Pawlowski. Is that the aim of what your comments were?
So recognizing that part of the challenge here is that when people use alone, they are more likely to die, because if they're not with other people, there's no chance for intervention. Having said that, I think it's really important for us to balance the safety and feelings of safety by all community members with the rights of people who use drugs and our efforts to keep them safe. So yes, I do think we should expand the locations in public spaces where people will not be allowed to use drugs.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Wilson. To you, Dr. Day, how does the federal addiction policy impact your incredibly innovative way of delivering your policies in Alberta with respect to drug addiction and treatment? Is it positive or is it negative?
There we go. So thank you for that question. I think that Alberta does not feel particularly well supported in its policies around the response to the drug crisis. I think that there are things that we would appreciate happening. So, for example, one of the greatest predictors of a person staying in recovery if they've gone through treatment and they're on evidence-based treatment medications is employment. Are there opportunities for the federal government to support employers to take on people in an early sustained recovery? Are there opportunities for the unemployment insurance system, for example, to support a person who is in active addiction, who's lost their job, to go and receive supplemental funds so that they can successfully attend treatment and recover their life and go back to work? There are lots of things that we could be talking about that I don't think are controversial, that I think could have broad support in the public to support recovery for our population.
Thank you, Dr. Day and Dr. Ellis. Dr. Pawlowski, please, for 2 minutes.
No, having previously brought up the fact that I think public consumption is detrimental to society in many ways, us as a committee, if we're going to make recommendations, like, what do we do about it? If we allow and we decriminalize possession, where are they supposed to do it? When people are homeless and they are users, are they supposed to go in their tents and quietly die there so we can't see them? Like, what is your solution? And I really mean this, and if you don't have a solution now, think about it. Do we put the safe injection sites like out of the public domain? Do we patrol around there? Or how do we do it so that we let people who are addicts use it but not have them be in public because of the detrimental effects? Anyone who wants to answer?
Question for me?
Sure. Why don't you start with you?
Sure, I can jump in. I mean, I think you really speak to the importance of having services such as overdose prevention sites readily available to people in community. We have 12 of them here in Vancouver, but now we recognize that 60% of the people who are dying through inhalation, not injection. So it's a question of pivoting and being able to accommodate those individuals so that they are able to use safely if that's what they choose to do. And that's why those services like safe consumption sites are so incredibly important.
If anyone else wants to add their 2 cents there, go ahead.
Yeah, perhaps I could add to Deputy Wilson's comments. I think people like choice. They like to have options when it comes to anything in life. And when it comes to consumption of drugs, if there's only one option that doesn't suit them, then they're going to go where it suits them. That may be public consumption. So as noted in some of our supervised consumption sites or overdose prevention sites, there's no inhalation rooms or ability to inhale. We find that most of our overdose deaths are related to fentanyl and related to inhalation. So we need to provide spaces, I think, that would allow for that, but it can't be a space where someone has to take a bus for 4 kilometers and go across the city.
It's down. The fentanyl is driving the price down of all drugs.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
The toxic fentanyl is driving the price down of all drugs. Would you say that?
Thank you for your question. I don't know if I could say that it's driving the price down of all drugs. It's just that the fentanyl is so prevalent in the market, it's becoming cheaper and cheaper, and it is by far the drug of choice amongst users that are attracted to opioids.
Deputy Chief Wilson, you heard from Deputy Commissioner McDonald about the need for safe consumption sites to allow inhalation and to be closer to people. Can you talk about the impact of increased homelessness in major cities contributing to public drug consumption? And would you say that adding more safe consumption sites and allowing inhalation would help counter some of the concerns around decriminalization and that policy in British Columbia?
Absolutely. And it's a great example of the need to have a multifaceted approach to this. It's not just about decrim. It's not just about safe supply. It's not just about education, treatment, prevention. It's about everything together, and increasing the number of safe injection sites, safe consumption sites, where people can inhale as opposed to just injecting, I think is a very, very important piece of that. And when you overlay our increases in homelessness, I think it's really important to provide individuals with safe places where they can use drugs. We know that that's what many people are choosing to do in any event. And, I heard recently from a person who's actually was down in the downtown east side for 20 years and has now been clean for 11 years. It took him literally dozens of times in treatment. And he's only alive today because of the intervention of harm reduction and safe supply services. And so I think that this is a very, very complex issue. It's really important that we take this approach that covers off all different sets of circumstances. Ideally, we provide prevention and education so that people don't start using in the first place. But we also have to address the fact that there are some folks who are entrenched and who are using, and we want to try and keep them alive. And then there's sort of everyone in between. So I think that's probably my largest comment about today, that we really do need a multifaceted approach, and no one approach is better or worse than the other. They're all really necessary.